Welcome, Soundies, to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 16th of April, 2023. It's good to have you here. This is the We're Not at NAB edition of our Sound for Video session. We had hoped to go to NAB. For those that are not familiar, NAB is the National Association of Broadcasters. It is a massive, massive trade show. It's held, the main one is held in Las Vegas. There's also a New York version that's a little bit smaller other times of the year, but I've been 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19. So I've been 5 times. It is quite a show. I had hoped to go this time, but we decided instead, for a variety of reasons, scheduling, production, and we also want to work on a course at the end of this month. So we did not end up there, but we will certainly, hopefully be there next year. Right, let's take a look at our agenda for today. First up, there are a bunch of NAB announcements. This is just the top 2 on my mind, at least, but Rode just had a bunch as well. So there's a new RODECaster Duo. They announced that the RODECaster Pro II actually has a wireless receiver inside of it, and so you can connect some of their Rode Wireless Go 2 and their Rode Wireless Me to it directly without having to connect an additional receiver. Kind of a cool thing. And some other features. A new USB microphone from them. I think those are the main things that I remember from the Rode announcement. However, the ones that I am more interested in, more excited about, not that that's a bad one. By the way, the RODECaster Duo is basically a smaller version of the RODECaster Pro II. One of the things I'm pretty excited about here is some changes to DaVinci Resolve. There's a new version. This one will be beta, actually. So if you're working on important things, paid work in particular, do not upgrade until it's out of beta is my recommendation. I have found their betas are a little bit, they're not, if you're trying to get work done, they're not necessarily, it shouldn't be your first choice. But 18.5 of DaVinci Resolve includes some new features. The automatic speech-to-text feature is really nice. So it also creates subtitles, and you can also edit via text, which is a pretty interesting technology as well. So for the editors amongst us, there are some things for Fairlight as well. And we'll have to dig into the details here, but the list is down here quite a ways. Okay, support for edit and mix groups in Fairlight, which is cool. And then also support for AI-based audio classification. That's in the studio version, so that's the paid version only. But I'm assuming what that does is it does something in terms of classifying audio. So if you have say, for example, 3 different talent on screen, it'd be able to classify each of them or categorize each of the clips for each of those 3 actors is my guess, but more to come on that. I haven't dug into that yet. So that'll be something we'll be taking a look at here. Again, that's going to be a beta version, so be careful out there. The next thing that is pretty interesting to me is the new DEITY Theos digital wireless microphone system. So it's not available yet. They're announcing it here, but it is a dual channel receiver. It's a UHF system, but it does digital. It sends the audio. It's a digital encoding that it does, and then sends that over the UHF spectrum between 550 megahertz up to 900, and I don't remember exactly. But they're aluminum, so they're pretty tough. Little screens on them. You can also control them remotely. They have SMA connectors here, so the antennas are replaceable. Let's see what else. Yeah, they transmit between 550 and 960 megahertz, so of course you'll have to use the frequencies that are available in your particular area. Dual channel receiver. Oh, also built-in 32-bit float recorder inside of the transmitter. Pretty cool. And you can save to micro SD card. You can control it remotely via the Sciatus Audio app. 14 hours of battery life in the transmitter with AA batteries up to. So pretty interesting, it looks like. What it sounds like will be interesting to find out as well. Here's the transmitter, and you can just barely see that micro SD card sticking out right there, which is what you record to. And again, runs on AA batteries, which are replaceable. Thank you so much, DEITY, for actually making the batteries replaceable. I think they knew that if they were going to do something that would work for prosumers and even professionals, they had to do something like that. Built-in recorder. I don't know how they're getting away with this with the Zaxcom patents, but in the US at least, but it could be that they have actually licensed that from Zaxcom. I'm not sure. They were actually the first company to license any technology from Zaxcom. So it could be that they're now doing that here. Equivalent input noise of minus 130 dBu, A-weighted. So that sounds good. I think this is a big step up over their Connect, their DEITY Connect system, for a variety of reasons. Hopefully it's a lot cleaner too in terms of self-noise. So you can also wirelessly sync timecode with their TC1 timecode generators, which is cool, and their slate. Full color LCD screen, as I mentioned, aluminum body, SMA antenna ports. Let's see here. They said 14 hours. And then the receiver can be powered via their USB-C ports. So for the SPD-1, the power distribution system that they released fairly recently, you can also power the receivers in your bag. Pretty cool there. So all the specs here, all of this is over at deitymic.com if you're interested in the details. So those are a couple of the announcements from NAB. I'm sure we'll see more here over the next little bit. It's basically getting started today. So more to come on that. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about the topic that I prepared today. We have some questions here that will come back here. Yeah, we'll come back to some of those, but let's go ahead and jump into what I wanted to talk about first, and that is, and this could be a fiery topic for some people, but when it comes to mixing audio, whether that's live, for a live stream, for a live show, or even in post, there are some people that are into physical controls. And by physical controls, let me just show you. Here's an example. I'm talking about physical faders that you can actually move with your fingers. And now, of course, that whole world is changing some. We have a lot of software, like things you can run on your iPad or your phones. But there are also, of course, things like what we do on our computer. So for example, here, if I go over to the Mac here, here's a purely software mixer here. This is the ATEM software control. So I've got my faders, I've got my gain potentiometers here. I have some other effects as well. And of course, they each have their advantages and disadvantages. And in fact, I think it's important, actually, we'll come to that in just a minute, but my question is it just old school fluff to insist on using hardware control services? That's the big question. So let's also keep in mind that here in 2023, almost everything has a software component. Most mixers these days, there are still, of course, analog mixers, physical analog mixers out there, but a lot of mixers now are digital mixers. So there's a big software component to those as well. So they kind of combine some of each. They have the physical faders and physical knobs that you can turn to set the gain and things like that. But they also a lot of times rely, like a lot of those knobs, for example, are shared. They're not dedicated knobs. So for example, on a good old fashioned analog mixer, you have for each channel a gain knob and you have a fader and it's dedicated to that particular one. So once you start moving into digital mixers, things get a little bit more complex. So what can hardware mix controllers do that software can't? And this is not a comprehensive list, but here are some of the thoughts that came to my mind and why, when I can, especially for live, I think it's especially important to have the physical controls. And the one is faster access. So it's just easier. So if I'm doing, like here, I'm doing this live stream, I have, how many apps do I have open? Let's just take a look. To support this stream, I've got all of these apps open right now. So I've got the ATEM software control. I've got Safari browser, Chrome browser. So this is where I'm doing kind of my back end stuff. That's where I'm in the YouTube studio, and I have my my encoder. In fact, I can show you here my encoder here that we're actually streaming out to YouTube with. We have a Safari browser where we were showing you some things earlier. Here's the DEITY site. We've got the ATEM software control. We've got something we're going to demonstrate a little later, Hush, which is an app that reduces noise. We've got RX, we've got Audition, we've got, of course, a Finder window. We've got the system settings open because I had to route the audio. And then I'm using a Universal Audio Apollo, although I'm actually technically not using that right now. I don't need that at the moment. But the idea is you've got a lot, if you've got a lot going on your computer, what I've always found difficult in a live stream is when I've got to flip back over to the ATEM software control, grab my mouse, find the fader I want to move it down, find the other fader I want to move it up. A little bit more complicated. Now, one thing that the ATEM has done with the mini switchers is that they do have a scripting language. So you can script some of that, and you can set up physical, incidentally, this is interesting, you can set up things like stream decks to automate certain things. So you can push a button, physical control, to create, to kind of run through a software sequence of steps. So in any case, there you see that advantage of having hardware. So a lot of times, for example, the stream decks are used by people that are using OBS to stream. And the reason for that is because there's a lot going on in software. And here's an interesting thing too. In software, if I switch back over here to the Mac, I get one pointer. I can't move multiple faders at the same time in this kind of interface. I can move one at a time is all. So I can move this one down, and I can move this one up if I needed to. So that's okay. But if I need to move two at the same time, I have a problem. And you might ask yourself, so when do you ever need to do that? Well, let me just show you here. If by the way, I'm doing this solo today. You see, I keep looking down at the board here. Let me just show you here. Here, for example, if I wanted to play some music and fade me out or duck it behind me, I can do, I can play the music here, my microphone here. Or if I wanted to, again, duck it behind me, I can do that like this. So I can move two at the same time, which is pretty useful. And that's not something you can do on a computer. Now, can you do that on other devices? Let's take a look here. So let me just switch over here. I am using a Zoom F8, and I'm going to go ahead and come over here to, yes, here. So I'm using this is the app for the Zoom F8. And the interesting thing with this is I can actually move two faders at the same time. So I can move one up and the other down, and vice versa. So these have come a long way. This app I didn't care for a whole lot when it first came out because it was really persnickety and jumpy. Like as soon as I put my finger down, it would jump by 3 to 6 dB. Now I can actually finesse it a lot better than I used to be able to. So the software mixers on iPad at least, and you'd have to check on, it's going to depend on which particular mixer you're talking about and which app you're talking about and which platform you're running the app on. But there are, different advantages and disadvantages here. And we're starting to see these software apps come to a better spot. Actually, before I come there, let me go back. And here's an example. Now on the iPad, I have to switch back to the keynote that we're using so that I can show you that. And kind of things that kind of slow you down. So that's faster access. That's multiple simultaneous changes. So you can do that on a physical board, of course. You can now do it on some apps. And my Allen and Heath SQ5 app also allows that. It supports the ability to move two faders at the same time, even. Although you know what? I didn't check. Can I do more than two? Good question. Let's check. Okay, so we're still attached here. I'm going to go back to the iPad that has the app here. I can can do these two. Yeah, it looks like I can do 3. Can I do 4? Yes. I can. Can I do 5? I'm not sure if I'm coordinated enough. It's more an issue of coordination at this point. Yeah, I can move 5 at the same time. So that actually is pretty cool. They've definitely come a long way on this app. We have this connected to a Zoom F8N Pro at the moment, so pretty cool. So software is making some strides, definitely. I think smoother fades, again, that depends on the app. We're starting to see that become a lot better on things like iPad. It used to be a little bit rougher, but in any case, I think we're starting to see some improvement there as well. So arguably you can make smoother fades. That's a little ephemeral, if you ask me. So what about for software? What can software do that hardware cannot? So huge things. Number one, updates. Often they're free updates. So you buy whatever associated hardware once, and then they update the app over time, often adding additional functionality. So we've seen that definitely with the Zoom control apps for the Zoom series, F-series mixers and recorders. We see it on the sound devices side as well. Not so much with Wingman, but definitely on the higher end, the 8 series. We've seen much more there in terms of new features, which has been really, really helpful. With the software-based ones, the things that you can put on an iPad or a phone, they're more mobile. So that's pretty nice. So I've seen a lot of production mixers for live shows. They'll actually be walking around with their iPad and checking things during setup or even during the show, actually mixing, going to different locations with their iPad and being able, to mix on the fly without being tied right there to the board the entire time. Also, often less expensive. So if you have to integrate all of these controls into a mixing board, for example, it's going to be more expensive to do all of that. Unless you're going pure analog, but in any case, definitely usually less expensive, more mobile because it's usually smaller, and you often get these updates. So there are probably other things as well, but what I find is that there are a few cases, for example, with a live stream where I would prefer to have physical faders at the very least, so that I can control things. And actually, one of the things that I really appreciate, for example, about the RODECaster and all of the other kind of devices like it that have come out is for those that are doing relatively small live streams, operating everything on your own, being able to play the intro music by the press of a button, fade, move faders to kind of create a smooth experience in terms of, when the person comes in. I've always struggled with that with the ATEM software control. I should have just written scripts, but in any case, that's where I'm coming from on that. So just some things to think about. Again, work the way that makes the most sense to you. I'm not saying you have to do it one way or the other here. I'm not saying that it is objectively better to use physical controls versus software. I don't think that's true, especially when you get into post-production. There are so many people in post-production who have always just used their mouse, that for them, having a big control surface is A, just they don't have room for it. B, it just doesn't speed them up that much because they're used to working the way they work. But other people love them and use them all the time. Most re-recording mixers are using big consoles. So some things to consider there. All right, let's jump into our question and answer session. We had a couple of what I thought were really good questions. First from Trevor. If you had to pick between two microphones for indoor dialogue narrative film, and those two microphones were the Sennheiser MKH50 and the MKH8050, which one would you pick and why? First of all, this is not a purely objective. I can't give a purely objective answer. Nobody can give a purely objective answer. And there are right answers. I mean, none of these three microphones that you're going to see here are bad. And you can get great results with any of them. So with that as a preamble, I would probably choose the MKH50 if I were operating a boom manually. And the reason for that is it generally seems to handle... It seems better isolated. In other words, I don't get so much handling noise with the MKH50 versus the 8050. However, The 8050 does have a flaw, and that is that if any air moves through the little switches, the kind of recessed switches, that will hit the microphone capsule and create problems. So you should put tape over those switches if you are going to go that direction. So I would probably, if I could only choose one, choose the MKH50. I love the 8050 on a static boom pole. I use it all day long, all the time. Love it. It's smaller. But those are some of my first kind of thoughts about that. So I'd choose the MKH50. And then the same question, only this time, the winner of question number 1, the MKH50, and the Schoeps Colette CMC 641. I would choose the Sennheiser again. Again, this is where it gets very subjective. I don't love the sound of the Schoeps. It's okay, and you can EQ it really, really well. So it's a fine microphone, and you can make great sound with it as well. I just always felt like pretty much every recorded sound in there needed a good bit of EQ to make it sound its best, has been generally my experience. So again, both are, I actually own all 3 of those microphones. And when it comes to pulling one out, if I'm going to put on a static boom, I'll just put the 8050 out. I think basically the 8050 and the 50 sound almost identical. The 50 just does a little bit better with handling noise, and the 8050 is smaller and lighter. And it has it's a modular system as well. I don't use any of the other modules, but that is another potential advantage if that's important to you. So thank you for the question, Trevor. Hope that was helpful. And looks like you have some good recording ahead of you. The next question's from Sergio, but before we get to this, I wanted to come back and let's just take a look at the chat here and see what we've got going on here. Camille, thank you so much. Going to NAB, relatively close. Contribution train ticket to Las Vegas. Thank you. I'll have to save that for next year. I'm not going this year because of scheduling, but very much appreciate that. All right. Just running through the chat here. So Yoyada is pulling a Waves with the new V4 and eliminated themselves from the market. I'm not sure what you're referring to there, Christopher, to be honest. All right. Christopher also says that 550 megahertz on the low end struck me as pretty odd, maybe. Any idea why it doesn't start at 470? 550 up in my area means no free channels, major metro area. Yeah, I don't know why they chose that. I haven't had a chance to talk with Andrew, and not sure why. Daniel says that the audio classification, this is referring back to DaVinci Resolve Fairlight, and the new audio classification categorizes audio such as nature versus wind versus running water. So interesting. That'll be interesting too. Okay. Matt Ruff was talking about the Aperture MC Pro 4. He was waiting for the 4-pack. Instead, they released an 8-pack for nearly $2,000 more than my budget can take. Yeah, but for those that aren't familiar, MC Pro is a little RGB LED light, internal battery powered. Pretty cool. I used to use them for the lighting for the background until I got one of the Amaran Pixel tubes, which is what we're using now, and it does a very slow color fade, which I like right back here. Before I had to use at least 2 of the original MCs, but the MC Pro actually puts out more light. But it looks like that you can either buy 1 or you can buy a pack of 8 in a charging case, and they're quite expensive once you buy that many. All right, so easy. Physical knobs and sliders rules. Software drool. And that's fine. Again, anyone is welcome to their opinion. Certainly for live, I would much prefer to have physical hardware controls. So there you have it. Wooot. RME's Total Mix Remote has OSD or OSD for custom third-party controllers, as well as iPad remote app, which works pretty well, but their ARC USB hardware controller is just a delight to use. Yes. I'm not sure what Amet software control. I'm not sure are you referring to? Not sure what you're referring to exactly there, but good point about the cursor limit of one-click controller. Very limited on multi-touch like on trackpads. Yeah, agreed. All right, looks like there's some talk here about lavalier microphones, Christopher and Matt. Coming from the live world, I use all 8 fingers sometime. Yeah, and that's, again, when it comes to live, I think there's definitely a case for it. Live learning on the Allen & Heath software controller. Very good. For those that are not familiar, Allen & Heath makes some fantastic mixers, both traditionally analog. They still have an analog line, I believe, and they also have several lines of digital mixing boards. Quite popular now in the live sound reinforcement world. All right. Although mixing on an iPad can have benefits in live production, there can be continuity issues. Example, dry fingers not being recognized on the screen and connectivity problems when relying on Wi-Fi. Another great point there, Audio Buff. I know when you're mixing at the church, I've seen you at the DLive board with physical controllers many times, and you bring up a good point. There can be problems when you're using an iPad or other remote devices and things like that. Right. Alejandro asks, has DEITY set a release date for the Theos wireless system? No, they just said coming soon. As far as I know, I haven't seen a date yet. I don't know if anyone else has intel on that. Matt clearly prefers the MKH50. We use them at work all the time. Yeah, okay. I wouldn't argue with you on that. All right. Here we go. From Mark, having managed data center operations, single pane of glass software tools were needed. Combining apps, audio, video controls in a single screen could be beneficial to the solo management of these technologies. There's another great point. So, yeah. Good point. There's a time and a place, and that's where I'm saying I'm not gonna. I don't think there's a single answer for every single situation. Definitely some advantages here. Okay, Southpaw Sound says, I have a Zoom F3 and I'm upgrading from an EOS M6 Mark II to an EOS R10 for timecode and record time. Timecode might be harder to set up than I thought, but I don't want a cable from cam to recorder. Yeah, unfortunately with that F3, so it does not have an inbuilt timecode generator. What it does have is a Bluetooth radio, which allows it to connect to an Atomos, I don't know what they're calling it now, UltraSync Blue. And then from that, you have to connect to an UltraSync 1 and attach that to the camera, or to an Atom X module within the Ninja 5 recorder. So it's not straightforward. Unfortunately, but I think what Zoom was going for with the F3, this little guy, is they were trying to get something really portable and provide a kind of an out for people that did want to use timecode. And by out, I mean you have to add this Bluetooth. It's hard to see here, this little thing. So you have to buy this Bluetooth module, plug it in, communicate to a Bluetooth-enabled timecode generator, which the only real one it's compatible with, as far as I'm aware, is the Atomos UltraSync Blue. And yeah, not the easiest thing. Oh, okay, ATEM. I think you meant ATEM. Yeah, as far as I don't know if they have. I don't know if they have groups, if you can set up groups. Does anyone know in the software control if you can set up groups and move multiple faders at the same time? I still don't know if that solves the problem of being able to move one up while you're moving one down, like you typically would a crossfade. But again, you can create scripts to do that if you know you're going to need to do that. Okay, Sheriff Logs asks, have you tried the Avid S6, seen the new Icon Pro X features controller released at NAMM? I have not. S6 is probably way more than I would need. I think that's the a bigger one. They have the Avid, those are control surfaces for Pro Tools. And then there's also a new Icon Pro X. I haven't heard anything about that. We'll have to take a look at that. Just released here at NAMM. It's weird to me that NAMM and NAB are really this close together. I would like to go to NAMM sometime too. I don't know why they moved NAMM to April. It used to be in January. All right. I thought about using just a dog training clicker to help sync to later, but I'm open to other options. I just clap. Everyone, most people have got hands and you can just clap. The dog training clicker I'd be concerned about because you have to be able to see it. Well, not necessarily. I guess if you're recording scratch audio, you don't necessarily, but the nice thing about a clap is that there's something recorded on the video that's very clear about when the sound should occur. With a dog training clicker, not as clear. So that's one thing to consider. Okay, on your audio, Hampton says, on your audio cleanup list, you have spectral noise reduction in the middle of the list, but if using Clarity VX Pro, should this be done earlier in the cleanup steps? Experiment with it. Don't take any one person's word for it, but generally I try to address some of the other issues. So if I've got clipping, for example, I would definitely take care of that first. If you've got reverberation and you're doing that in a separate step, a de-reverb, I would do that first, and then do noise reduction after that is typically how I would approach it. You can do it however you choose to, though. All right, and then thoughts on the announced RODECaster Pro II firmware that lets you plug in the new PodMic USB XLR. I'll have to look into that. I thought it was just a USB mic. I'll be honest, I skipped out of that part of the announcement. I saw it was a new USB mic, and I'm like, oh, cool. I ran out of time, actually, that was right before the stream started, so I had to jump out of the video before that. But I'm curious, so how, do they have a USB to XLR adapter? How are they doing that? Or does it have an XLR output as well? The new PodMix USB XLR. Oh, that's the little, you're right, the little live stream device, basically. That looks pretty cool as well for certain use cases. I think it has just one camera input. So an ATEM may be a better choice if you have to do multiple sources, but if you just need a single one, that could be a pretty good option there. So it looks pretty cool. Okay. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier, the RODECaster Pro II's ability to use their wireless gear like the Wireless Me or Wireless Go 2 as supported XLR channels due to the built-in receiver. That's pretty cool. It's a nice little plus if you've already got a RODECaster Pro II, or if you've already got the wireless systems, you can just integrate those. Pretty nice. Okay, let's go back over to Sergio's question. If you find time, could you look into the Hush audio app for Mac that removes noise and reverb from spoken audio? iZotope RX10, D-Reverb, and Accentize D-Room Pro are too expensive for a hobby. I'm not an audio professional. The app is $49.99. I'll buy it if I learn that it has the Curtis Judd stamp of approval. Well, first of all, it needs the stamp of approval of your ears, not of me. So that's the first thing. Secondly, let's go take a look at it. Let me just get that queued up on the screen here. All right, here we go. So just to give you an idea, this is yet another noise reduction application. Again, they're using the term AI, which stands for artificial intelligence. Let's make that a little bigger so you can see it. I mentioned this on the tech check last night, but it really kind of annoys me, to be honest, and I think it's disingenuous to call this artificial intelligence. I think really what it is it's machine learning and neural networks, but artificial intelligence is a bit more than that technically. In any case, it's another app that does basically kind of automatically clean up background noise and room reflections or reverb. And they say without audible artifacts or loss of clarity. So you can try it for free. So Sergio, that's the first thing. You can try it for free for 3 weeks, 21 days. I would recommend you do that and try it and see what you find. I also want to encourage everyone to use their own ears and trust your ears and continue to practice. Remember, last week we talked about ear training, and a lot of it has to do with just practice, practice, practice. So you just got to get in there and try it out and see what happens. A few things that it says. So it does de-reverb, evidently reduces room reflections and comb filtering. Takes care of broadband sounds like ventilation, appliances, traffic, wind. If it gets too windy, these are things that I always find it's like, okay, if it gets really windy and you are actually in a situation where wind is moving across the microphone capsule and physically moving the microphone capsule, usually no sort of post-processing can fix that, but maybe light stuff it could help with. Evidently also manages things like transient sounds like chirping birds, barking dogs, honking horns. We'll see. You basically just drop it. You just drop a bunch of audio files into the app and it processes them and puts them wherever you tell them to put it. It works by using the neural engine within Apple Silicon. So that's good. And it's kind of a one-time thing. It's not a cloud service like many of the others are. It's actually a standalone app that runs on your Mac. Your data stays private and the app is yours forever. So you buy the license and you keep it. So it does support Intel CPUs, but they recommend Apple Silicon. So with that, let's take a look at what the app looks like. Here it is. It's pretty boring, but if it does the job, then boring is good. So pretty much here you have a mix parameter, so you can keep how much of the original you want to keep versus how much of the processed audio. Normally you put that at 100% and see how it goes. It's a batch processor, so it's not like you can preview it. You just drop it in. So that's a little bit of a downside relative to other tools like Isotope RX or Clarity VX. You can tell it where you want to put the audio, and if you want to put a prefix, so I just told it to put processed at the start of the file name when it processes it and saves it. You can also tell it what format to use, so you can use same as the original file, or you can specify a specific sample rate and bit depth and file format. I typically just leave that same as the original file. So with that, let's go grab some audio here. Let's go get our dialogue isolate noise and drop that in, and our spectral noise repair sample and drop that in. And they're both done. They're relatively short clips, to be fair. But let's go over to Audition and see what we got here. So let me just double click here. I am going to pick up those two files that it just processed. Okay, so here we have our dialogue isolate and our processed dialogue isolate. So let's hear before. This is the before. And here we go on this.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay, so that's where we're starting. Here's the processed.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
I'm curious what you all thought about that. That was pretty impressive. Let's go over to RX and see what RX does with that. Exact same sample. Here's the same sample, and here is dialogue isolate.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it.
That, of course, is the starting point. Let's go ahead and do a preview.
It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Okay, I would say Hush is doing a surprisingly good job at that. And it is obviously less expensive than Dialog Isolate in Isotope RX, which I believe only comes in, it's either just in the advanced or it's in the advanced and in the standard version, but I think it's just advanced. The advantage you have with RX, of course, is the ability to tune it. So you can tell it whether you want to boost or reduce the dialogue itself, boost or remove the gain or the noise. You can tell it how sensitive to be, and you can also have it preserve the ambiance to some extent. So it can also, so it's in essence, it's breaking things out into dialogue, noise, and ambiance, and you can control all three of them independently. You also get different algorithms here, so you can use best or good. And then you also have a sensitivity controller, so you can kind of tune the algorithm a little bit. However, Hush did an amazing job, I thought, just on its own. You can, of course, dial it back some using this mix parameter here, but you can't really preview it. You have to essentially process multiple versions and then come back and figure out which one sounds the best to you. So there are still some advantages from my point of view to going with the RX version if you're doing a lot of post-production for film and video. But if you're on a tighter budget, I think Hush does a really nice job with that one. Let's take a look at another one here. Let's get the spectral noise repair sample. This is me talking with a fan and a phone chirping. Here we go. Here's the starting point. And as I'm talking, you can see that we are going to go ahead and play this ringtone from our phone. And I'll even put one in here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for how realistic it is to be able to clean those up. Let's see what we get. Okay, so, excuse me, that's where we're starting. Here is what Hush did. And as I'm talking, you can see that we are going to go ahead and play this ringtone from our phone. And I'll even put one in here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for how realistic it is to be able to clean those up. Let's see what we get. Okay. Again, what do you think? What are you seeing? Yeah, so we have a couple of thoughts here. We have Alex, who's impressed for a 50 spot. I agree. Got rid of a lot of clicks and steps and a lot of the noise. It does sound impressive, especially for that price. Completely. Impressed for $50. When the sound was on top of the speech, it was less impressive, but also much harder to do. Agreed, 100%. All right. Cool. And then on that second one, again, the same thing. It left sort of some clicky noises there. Let's see what RX does with that same sample, just out of curiosity. Here we go. And as I'm talking, you can see that we are going to go ahead and play this ringtone from our phone. And I'll even put one in here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for how. And as I'm talking, you can see that we are going to go ahead and play this ringtone from our phone. And I'll even put one in here between phrases, just so that we can get a sense for how. We're going to go ahead and render it so it'll play back. It's hard to do the preview here. Here we go. And as I'm talking, you can see that we are going to go ahead and play this ringtone from our phone. And I'll even put one in here. I would say it's arguably that the Hush even did better, depending on how you're looking at it. I do like that you have more control here with the RX version, of course, but if you're really just trying to take the edge off, I think the RX is a better option under most circumstances. Although we could, and also I'd invalidated my own point. We had to. The preview is tough to do with the best setting on Dialog Isolate. You have to fast. I mean, this is a fast computer. It's a Mac Studio with a whatever the fancy processor is called, M1 Ultra, I think. So it's not lacking in resources, but really to play back here, I just went ahead and rendered it so that you could actually hear what it sounded like. Because sometimes, like when you start playing in preview mode, it would actually miss the first part, so you still heard the fan, and then you're like, wait a minute, is it not catching the fan, or is it catching the fan? So on and so forth. So maybe there's not a huge advantage there, but I do like the fact that you can control the individual parameters. I can control the dialogue, the noise, and the ambiance independent of each other. So Sergio, I would say that that's a well-spent $49.99. So good luck. Get out there, make some great sound. Nothing takes the place of getting clean sound from the start, but if you do have to do some noise cleanup, that looks like a pretty good way to do it. All right, so let's take a look at the chat and see what we've had. Let's see here. We'd like to hear it process a recording with heavier reverb. We can do that. We can do that right now, in fact. Let's go back to the Mac and let's go get a file over here. Danny stood in a very reverberant hallway, so I need to go get the Hush app. Here it is, and Finder. Here's our reverb sample. Okay, let's go back over to Audition and pick that up. It is right here. Okay. I need to play the original too, so I need to double click and get the original, which is going to be, let's see, right here. There it is. Okay, so here is the original. We'll play this back first. Here we go.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years.
Okay, so that's the original. Here's the processed.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but I wanted to make sure I used the...
Not quite as good. Now, of course, we could reprocess that. Let's just do this. I'm going to go ahead and take this, and we're going to close that file. We're going to come back over to the Finder and to Hush. Let's go and drop that file in again. But this time, before we do that, let's just drop it to 50% and see what that does for us. Get the file. Here it is. Replace. Okay, back over into Audition. Let's go pick up that processed file off the desktop here. And here it is. Okay, let's listen to that now.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but I wanted to make sure I used the jar of yeast that I...
Okay, that's a little better, I would say. There's still some reverb there, but it did not bad. Let's go take a look and see what RX does with that. So file open, go get our reverb sample. Here's our reverb sample. Now we have a couple options here in RX. We have D-reverb and we have dialogue. de-reverber. The dialogue is easier to work with. Let's go ahead and try that first.
This morning I baked a loaf of bread. Apparently, even though I wasn't baking a turkey this year, I still am used to getting up early and cooking something. I haven't baked a loaf of bread for probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but I wanted to make sure I used the jar of yeast that I sought out last year in 2020 before it goes bad. So we'll see how this loaf of bread turns out. I baked it quite a long time with a water bath, and I think it'll be all right. So that's what I did.
Definitely have to kind of tweak the parameters there to get where you want to be. But I felt like the mild settings were much more useful than Hush were. But with Hush, if you dial back that mix a little bit, I think it still could help kind of take some of the distracting nature of the reverb away and provide something a little bit cleaner that could probably work. So, all right. Hampton said, not quite as good, hearing some roughness in the process file. Definitely some artifacting there. What are RX, Hush, Clarity VX alternatives for real time, if you know any, potentially in a VST3 form? Well, we did talk about Cedar DNX or Cedar SDNX a couple, 4 weeks ago, something like that. So that's a hardware solution. I don't know a VST3 form aside from RX and Clarity VX. I don't know. Does anyone else know? I think there was some talk earlier about an Apollo plugin. And then Christopher says, as a Cedar DNS8D owner, I haven't found any software solution that compares when real-time live usage is required. Oh, there is a noise assist plugin. So that's an option. It's not a VST though. And then also Christopher mentions there's CVox for Apollo if you have that available to you. Yep, the Cedar plugins are really expensive. All right, Christopher says, trying Hush on a 32-bit file from Track-E and processing on my iMac Pro is going really slow. Their use of the neural processor in M1 Silicon is clearly faster from when you ran it. Yeah, okay. It's good to know. At this rate, it's actually slower than real time on Intel. Clip is about 10 minutes long, and I think it's going to take closer to 15 minutes to finish at the rate it's moving. So definitely something to keep in mind there as well. That is definitely a downside with Hush, is that if you want to change that mix setting and do multiple, if you're working with a long podcast or a long video, dropping that in there, if you're not on Apple Silicon, is going to take a while. So something to keep in mind. Cool. All right. Any other questions that folks have out there? Feel free to drop them in the chat, especially if you put an @CurtisJuddAudio. That's really helpful. Eric also mentioned, going back to Hush, that it isn't necessarily a natural sound, but it did really reduce the ringtone. So that's usually the trade-off. These tools are definitely getting better. Still not perfect, but definitely better than we've had in the past. So going in and doing spectral repair on individual noises is a lot of time and effort. So, and also didn't always result in the very best results. So having these tools available to us now is a really, really nice thing. By the way, today I'm using a different signal chain. So we do have the Earthworks Ethos as my microphone. That is going into a new mixer that I cannot talk about just yet. It is still under embargo, but we will be talking about sometime in May, about mid to late May. So that is something that will be coming up, and we're running the output of the mixer into the Canon C200 to the ATEM Mini out to the Epiphan Pearl Nano and streaming to YouTube. So that's the signal chain. It's digital from the time it gets to the camera. The camera converts to digital, and then it's digital the rest of the way. So good. Okay. Christopher, once this finishes, I want to check if it retains the timestamp metadata correctly. Let's see. We can probably check that right now in Audition. Let's see, this is the processed file. Let me switch over to the Mac so you can all see this, what I'm looking at here. This just starts at 0, 0, 0. So this is the D reverb. And if I go home, see, this didn't have timecode built in. It doesn't look like, or at least it wasn't reading it on this side. So it doesn't. I don't know if any of these have that I can actually test that, or test that question here. Yeah, none of these. All these start at 0, 0, 0, 0. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. We would have to check on another file here. All right. Other thoughts? I'm a little sad to not be at NAB this year. But next year, hopefully, we'll be able to get there. Yeah, I don't have anything else at the moment here. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat. Would love to help with that. We are looking at a new course, by the way. So one of the reasons we're not at NAB this year is that we are going to work on a course. So the course, we have a week blocked off at the end of May to start working on that. So that course should probably be ready sometime in June or first part of July. So the course is going to be the very first lighting course. Since it is Learn Light and Sound, we are going to make a lighting course for the first time, and it will be focused on the fundamentals of lighting and especially lighting for interviews. So that's the plan for right now. So that's one thing we're looking forward to. And I think that's everything for today. Doesn't look like there are any other questions out there. So get out there and make some great sound, and we will talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.